Welcome to another episode of 18 to 49. I am Alaia, and I'm really excited because today I am joined once again by my friend Justin, who was here on the X-Files Season 10 Revisited episode. So if you're an X-Files fan, definitely check that out. But Justin is back, and this time we are talking about the Gilmore Girls. Welcome back, Justin.
Thanks for having me.
So we're actually going to be talking about some of our favorite moments, favorite episodes, things that have happened in the show. And Justin, I was just telling him, he's like the perfect guest to have on this episode because...
My kitchen is Luke's diner.
Yes, his kitchen is set up like Luke's diner, complete with Luke's sign that is now autographed. Then he has some other cool behind-the-scenes Gilmore Girls type experience, so that's always fun. And we're obviously doing this in anticipation of... I don't even know what to call it. It's not season 8. It's just like...
It's like a revival.
It's just a Gilmore Girls revival. It's 4 episodes. I mean, if you're a Gilmore Girls fan, you already know this. But for those who may be out of the loop and haven't started the Gilmore Girls yet or are somehow living under a rock and don't know about this, Netflix has picked up the Gilmore Girls and they're bringing it back for 4 episodes. They're each 90 minutes, right? And they cover each season in their life. So like a year in the life of Gilmore Girls. So maybe first, before we get into our favorite stuff, just because it's on my mind, how do you think this is going to turn out, this revival? I feel like I'm hopeful because the original people are all back, including those behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. But it's still just, I think because of what we went through with the X-Files, it makes me a little nervous, and I'm wondering like how good it's actually going to be.
I had the same thoughts, especially in relation to X-Files, although I love it. Yeah. It's very, very dear to my heart. Mm-hmm. I believe they're different shows, but I think that Amy Sherman-Palladino and her husband Daniel are just better writers.
Definitely better than Chris Carter.
Yes. And so I think based on that alone, it's already set up to be better than the other revival that we were so focused on.
Yes.
I also think that they were not involved in season 7, and season 7 almost shouldn't or doesn't exist.
Right. I was going to say, the other thing is, I think most of us who have seen all 7 seasons of the Gilmore Girls are probably hoping that since that Amy and Daniel are back, that this will be better than season 7 was. And I do plan to rewatch season 7 just to be fresh, when the show picks up. But, I have forgotten so much of season 7. I just try to block it out.
So did Lauren Graham. There was an article that said that she forgot a major plot point.
What plot point did she forget?
Well, Lorelai married Christopher in season 7.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake.
Of course, that was a huge mistake.
But she blocked it out and forgot about it.
What's funny is I remembered that she married Christopher, but I couldn't remember which season. I didn't remember where it fell in the scheme of things, but I just remember it being a giant mistake.
Yeah.
Oh, so...
the Palladinos had led, season 6 was the introduction of Luke's daughter, April, which, whatever.
Another mistake, but... Anyway.
She exists.
Yes.
She's part of the canon, and then follow the breakup of Luke and Lorelai, and then Lorelai makes a decision with Christopher, and then that was it. They didn't come back for season 7. I don't think they knew until almost the end. And then the David Rosenthal took over as showrunner. They basically had to do season 7 without Palladino's map, and so they ended up doing a lot of things that were not in character. Mm-hmm. And then the show just ended. They didn't even know they were not coming back. They got canceled after the finale had aired.
But I would say, at the very least, where the show left off in season 7, that was a good place for it to end, get canceled, whatever it was. I mean, it's...
Well, yeah, because it had followed Rory through Chilton, and then, So it ended up being a good stopping point for the series, I think.
Yeah, because at that point, it just becomes... It's way too split. She either... Rory either comes back to Stars Hollow for some reason, or you're following the 2 women living in completely different places. And it's just, I think, so interesting and well-timed. I don't know how much this played into any of it, or if it's just a coincidence, but it's so interesting. And a lot of people forgot this because they blocked out a lot of season 7, but Rory went off to go work on the Obama campaign.
Right.
And the show ended before Obama got elected. So in the real world, Obama gets elected, has 8 years in office, as we all know, and many of us are sad about. He's on his way out. But now the Gilmore Girls is coming back. So it's just interesting, like, real-world timing kind of stuff.
Yeah, she goes on the bus to work for the Obama campaign. I think even before some of the primaries had happened.
Yeah.
I think he had just announced his run.
Yeah. It was interesting that they chose to do that. And, yeah, it was very early. Because the show ended in 2007, right? Yeah. So I don't even... Yeah, the primaries wouldn't have happened by the time they wrote and shot that.
Just announced his run, yeah, a little bit after.
So talk about some real world, like, interesting things working out. And now, here we are, 2016, and it's coming back. So we will be back to talk in depth, I'm sure, and overanalyze the 4 episodes that we're going to get. I will be watching them all in one day.
I'll probably do the same.
Yeah. But in this episode, we wanted to talk about some of our favorite episodes and moments from the Gilmore Girls. Now, obviously, season 7 is not ranking really high for either of us.
I don't remember much of season. I remember, like, some of the major brushstrokes, but I don't remember the minutiae of what actually happened in season 7. I know she had Kristen Ritter as a friend.
Who?
She was Jessica Jones.
Oh, Kristen Ritter. Yeah.
Oh, actually,
was she friends with Marty? Was that around the same time?
They came in late. Marty was in season 4 or 5, and then Marty was around and was friends with, Lucy was her name? I don't remember. They were there. They tried to give Rory friends in season 7.
Yeah.
Which was not a terrible idea. It just didn't work.
It just didn't, Rory and friends is...
Rory had Paris.
Yeah, Rory had Paris. She had Lane. Other than that, it never really worked. And this is getting off from, like, favorite moments a little bit, but I just think it's so interesting. Rory had the worst taste in men, and I don't know if they realized they were doing that as they were writing this series, and if they did, like, it was obviously intentional, but I was reading an article the other day about, like, which guy deserved Rory's heart, and I didn't even read it. I just scrolled through it because I'm like, none of them were right. But what was funny about the article was they listed 17 guys, and I'm like, I don't remember 17 guys talking to Rory over the course of 7 seasons, but, I had forgotten about Marty, so it reminded me of that, but there was Marty, Jess, Dean, Logan.
Who else?
I don't know. They must have listed, like, every guy in Stars Hollow or something. I
think they did, like, it was Kirk.
Yeah, Kirk must have been on there or something, because it was, I'm like, where did 17 guys even come from? And that's when I just stopped reading it. I'm like, this article is not
that's where I kind of agree with Amy Sherman Pelion, because there was an article where she's like, I don't understand, all the focus on Rory's boyfriends. Like, the focus is always on Rory as an independent woman, like, living her life and having a job. And, like, the boyfriends were a part of that, but they weren't, like, the only thing. And, I get that, shipping does exist in other fandoms. I was always, they're fine, whatever Rory chooses is fine. And I just like the relationship that she had with her mom and with her grandmother.
Yeah.
Those are the relationships that I cared about.
Those are the primary ones. I think the reason I think about the boyfriend ones is because they just seemed like such poor choices. Like, I think if she had, like... So? Yeah, I feel like if she had, like, an okay boyfriend, I'd be okay with them, like, sidelining it, and it would be much easier to focus on the other relationships. But because some of the boyfriends just seemed like, why? So, first, let's start with Dean, who was the first boyfriend that she came back to and got involved with after he was married. It was like, really, Rory? Bad decision. And obviously bad on Dean's part, cheating on his wife. Then you have Jess, who I think tends to be most people's favorite, but he wasn't always, he wasn't awful, and I like Milo. How do you pronounce his last name?
Ventimiglia.
Okay. I love him as an actor, and, like, he seems like a cool dude. But Jess just had so much attitude. He had his own issues and everything, but Rory seemed to have it so much more together than Jess did. And Logan just seemed like a jerk. Marty didn't seem right for her. I think Rory would need someone a little bit with a stronger personality than Marty had.
Yeah. Dean, post season 4, Dean was, like, a fine first boyfriend, right?
Yeah, he was an okay first boyfriend, yeah.
Jess, I think, was more on her level of intelligence. They got each other in terms of books, and they Jess would call Rory on her BS, and that was good, but he was always kind of messing things up, and he ran away all the time. He ran to Venice and all that sort of stuff. And then Logan, I think, grew through his relationship with Rory, because he started as this kind of rich trust fund Christopher stand-in, right? Because I think Logan was Rory's Christopher.
Yeah.
But then kind of evolved to this person that tried to support her as an individual, but then he did shitty stuff too.
Yeah.
He did the Ross and Rachel, we were on a break, and he slept with all those girls, and she took him back, and so... But also... they're what, 21, 22?
That's true. That's true. Okay.
And I think Rory had her rebellious phase much later in life. She didn't have it in high school. She started having it, I think, around the time she slept with Dean.
Yeah.
And that was a big turning point.
Okay, you're right. I still stand by none of them were worthy. But you did point out a good thing that they're
I was
young.
never fully on Team Jess because I'm on Team Luke and Lorelai, and Jess is Luke's nephew, and that just seems very strange.
Yeah, it's a little too close.
So that would be my one caveat for not Team Jess.
All right, so we've talked about some problematic things, but there's a lot to love about this show. I mean, I don't know if I started watching it season 1, but I did start watching it early on, and I've seen every episode, and more than once. I know that I've watched the series through at least 2 times.
Yeah.
I want to say 3, but I feel like because I keep forgetting season 7, I've probably only watched it completely through in reruns or Netflix twice. But I loved the show because of the focus on mother and daughter. A good relationship for the most part. Like, they had some struggles later on, but for the most part, they had a good relationship, seemingly healthy relationship. I thought the show was really fun and snappy, with fantastic dialogue. And it came around, like, in a period of my life where I've always loved movies, but I really started getting into movies that had really clever dialogue that I could pick out. Like, that stood a lot on the dialogue. Right. Like, I'm thinking of Tape with Richard Linklater. Oh, wait, did he do that one? Did he do Tape?
Tape?
Tape is Ethan Hawke, Uma Thurman, and Robert Sean Leonard. I think it's Richard Linklater because Ethan always works with him.
Yes, you're right.
But then, like, I had seen before Sunrise, and that's very heavy on the dialogue. And so even though I've always had an appreciation of movies, it was around the time when I was really starting to identify and like things that had really strong writing. And Gilmore Girls, there's obviously plenty of stuff to look at, and they have a really quirky house, and they live in a quirky town, but the show is really about the witty dialogue, particularly between Lorelai and Rory. I just think it was really smart, and I really loved it, and I'm sure there are people who've never seen the show, but I've never come across anyone who has hated the Gilmore Girls.
Me either. Well, they wouldn't be in my life anyway. But just, like, in normal... like, interactions, I don't think I've come across.
Yeah.
I've come across people who haven't seen the show, but I don't think they have a strong feeling against it.
Most people who have given it a chance either love it or are okay with it, but I've never met anyone who hates it. And not that I've ever met anyone who hates the X-Files either, but I think, because the X-Files is so strongly sci-fi, aliens, whatever... there are certain people who it's just not going to be their cup of tea, and even for me, it's the only show like that I've ever watched and gotten into. But Gilmore Girls is a little more mainstream, and I don't know anyone who hates it. I mean, there are probably plenty of people who don't love it, but I've never met anyone who hates it. It's a really well-done show. Do you have a favorite episode or season or something that has always really stood out to you about the show?
I think I started watching the show on DVD. I think I breezed through seasons 1 and 2.
Was it still currently airing, or
yes.
did you start? Okay.
Because I think I started watching around season 3.
Okay.
But the dialogue was So it was like a drug, but a good kind of drug. Like,
Yeah.
it woke up a part of my brain, especially as a writer. It kind of was like, oh wow, like
This is possible on TV.
Whole style of writing, and not only is it witty and smart, it's actually, character driven. It just, that was like my way to sit and relax, was just being overstimulated by this dialogue written by Jordan Palladino. So that was my real memory around it. Favorite season? I think all the seasons are good. I think season 4 and 5 are my favorite.
Now, what happens in 4 and 5? This is a show for me that, since we're following these two women this whole time, they really blend together for me. And other than like Rory going off to Europe,
season 4 is Luke and Lorelai finally get together. Season 5 is pretty much the first part of their relationship, and Rory is second year in Yale. So and then Emily and Richard go through their own relationship issues. So those were like the really, like, the show starts to come into its own, I think. And I know that the Palladians were building towards something come season 6, but they never got to finish it. Yeah. So it was kind of like a crescendo, and then it went back down.
Yeah, I don't remember what season it happened, but I'm guessing it's probably 4 or 5. But when Rory and Lorelai have that big blowout over Dean, I believe, when
season
Rory 4. Ends up going to live in the pool house at her grandparents' house. Yeah, that
starts in season 4 as she sleeps with Dean.
Okay.
And then it picks up in season 5, and then she goes to live with.
It not that I need a bunch of excessive drama or anything, but to me it showed that they could take the show to other places, and that they weren't afraid to have these characters do bad things and be on the wrong side, because, even though Lorelai was like a teen mom and everything, like, her life worked out. I mean, she obviously struggled, and there was the episode where Rory showed her grandmother where they lived and everything. But for the most part, like, Lorelai's always been fine. She lived in this town. Everybody loved Rory. She's always had this job. Everything's just kind of, like, worked out, and they're happy, and they get along. And so it was nice to see some conflict with these central characters and add some, like, layers of depth to it.
Yeah.
Do it in a way, like, as annoyed as I was with Rory for doing it, it was done in a really realistic way. Like, it didn't seem out of nowhere, it wasn't like, it was Dean, and I think she even says that at some point, like, it was Dean.
Yeah, the juxtaposed with Lorelai and Luke had spent sort of 3 seasons trying to figure out their feelings, and Luke buys that self-help tape and can see her face, and then that finally culminates to something, right? And then juxtapose that with her daughter making this really terrible, misguided decision to sleep with a married man. I think they had that conversation where Rory says it's Dean, and Lorelai says that he's married. Like, that's the bigger thing, and that's really the turning point for Rory, I think. And all that comes after, and Logan, and stealing the boat, because Rory has lived this sort of privileged life in a different way, where she's brought up in this very insular world of Stars Hollow, and she is smart, and she excels, and then all of a sudden she doesn't. Yeah. Right? And she makes all of these decisions that I think were questionable at the time, but I think it works for her character to sort of regress a little bit. That was infuriating watching it. All these decisions. But it's because, I imagine, like, for most intelligent people who are used to succeeding, when they don't, I think it's a real blow to their whole worldview. Yeah. I'm not super genius, but I could get by in school pretty well by not doing a whole lot of effort. Yeah. I was just smart that way. But then when you go into the real world and you start, well, that's not going to get you far.
Wake-up call for a lot of us.
There are other factors at stake, like luck and nepotism and all sorts of
Totally.
And then to have it switch where Rory starts kind of digging into the life of, her grandparents and the life that Lorelai rejected. Lorelai sees it as a personal insult to her and her bringing up. And that's the other issue, like, I don't know if we're getting off topic, but the dynamic of Lorelai and her mother and the perspective and the point of view of what Lorelai chose to do, I think we were always supposed to be on Lorelai's side, but the more we get in the series, the more you see from Emily and Richard's point of view, it's like, this is not as black and white as...
Yeah, I mean, it was their
Lorelai's
teenage daughter, you know? I mean, imagine how they were going to take all of that stuff.
It's like, I get it.
Happening.
Like, her, you know, Emily and Richard were very, like, somewhat totalitarian, and, you know, you have to live this life, and you want to get this life, but they're parents, right? That's what they want to do.
Yeah.
Of course, they weren't looking at their daughter as their daughter and seeing this kind of free spirit and who she really truly was, right? They wanted to fit her into cotillion dresses and balls, and so she rebels and sleeps with Christopher and is pregnant, but then she leaves and she shuts them out for almost 15 years of her life.
Yep.
It's justified to a certain degree, but then, you know, there's an episode where they did the flashback and it's like, Dear Emily and Richard, I think in season 3, and they did flashback to Lorelai and young Christopher and finding out that she's pregnant, and then she writes a letter to her parents, and you see the look on Emily's face and she's just heartbroken.
Yeah.
And you kind of understand her, where all this stuff comes. I don't know. I guess the older you get, the more you try to understand your parents too.
Yeah,
and
I could see Emily's side a lot more in later rewatches. I think my last rewatch was like complete from 1 through 7 was I think a year or two ago. And yeah, it was before I knew it was a revival, so there wasn't even this year, but it was one of those things where I think it was 2 years ago, and I'm like, December I'm watching holiday movies, November I'm going to watch all of the Gilmore Girls, and I just did it. And I think I appreciated Emily's side of things much more. But, you know, I think with a lot of people in our lives, especially our parents, the way they deliver information or the way they interact with you has a lot to do with it. And it's like that cliche, you can get more flies with honey, you know? I think if Emily had a different kind of personality, maybe the relationship wouldn't have been so damaged. But that's who they are.
But it's you know, it's two people who want the other to be a completely different thing.
Right.
Emily wants Lorelai to express love or appreciation in a specific way. Lorelai wants her parents to, like, see her and to see maybe some of the things that they had done weren't to her benefit. And then also she sees, well, I'm going to raise my daughter completely opposite, which works in a way. But then, you know, she almost has a relationship with her grandparents as an afterthought because they ask her to help pay for Chilton. And you see the way that Emily and Richard are with Rory. You know, they're so loving and so giving, and there's just a lot of complexity. I think that's why, on the surface, it's a very simple show about a family, about 3 generations of women. But the dynamics are so complex. You could do endless amount of hours with that. Yeah. And still come back to something interesting.
I wish that my mom and I watched more TV together. I wish it was a show that she and I watched together. I know a lot of mothers and daughters watch it together then. I think more mothers and daughters are watching it together now because people who watched it then and now have kids are going back. And I don't know if my mom would have liked it, but I just remember being a young teenager at that time. When did the show start? So it ended like 8 years ago, 9 years ago, and it was on for 7 seasons. So yeah, I was like a young teenager when it started. And I just remember wanting the Lorelai and Rory kind of relationship, which of course is going to be most people's default. They want to have the cool mom and the mom that they're friends with and all that. And you know, I'd always feel like, I mean, it didn't plague me emotionally or anything, but I would watch it and always get kind of bitter because I felt like my mom and I had more of the Lorelai and Emily relationship.
Yeah, I think most of us do.
Yeah, most of us do. But I was like, oh, you know, like Rory is so lucky. And there's pros and cons. I mean, we get what we get in life, but I had some friends who had young parents who were Lorelai's age when we were teenagers, and there's pros and cons to all of it. Like, I used to think about how my mom and I had just such an age difference and generational difference and cultural differences that, like, to this day, we still disagree about so many things and we can't even talk, you know. But then there are certain times where I'm really glad that I have a mom that's a little older and more mature and, you know, more grounded and experienced. And in a way, you know, when you think of Lorelai and Rory, and I'm sure they've talked about it on the show, but it's like they grew up together, you know.
Right.
I'm glad that I didn't have to grow up with my mom. And that's not something I could think about when I was 16, but I think about that now. I'm like, oh, how nice it must be to not grow up with your mom. You know, like, my mom's always an adult, you know?
I think when I first started feeling for Emily, what episode was it? It was when she comes to Stars Hollow and they show her around. Mm. It was season 1. Yeah, almost the end of season 1. Emily in Wonderland. And Rory shows her the potting shed where they lived. And then, you know, Emily meets Mia, who was kind of like the surrogate mom, and Emily is just, she's looking at the shed, and like Rory's describing it with like such love, and like, this is where we lived, we made it really pretty, and whatever, and like, Emily is heartbroken. And her response is, you know, you hated us that much. Because I can imagine being a mom and saying, my daughter left, had no contact with me, lived in a potting shed, and had a surrogate mom. Like,
yeah,
she must have really hated me, and just the level of guilt and resentment and like real emotion there really started to humanize. And I think I don't think the show would have worked without the parents being more involved. I think they really helped to. I
think they added a lot of depth.
Yeah,
because even though we got a little bit more depth and seriousness with Rory and Lorelai, like seasons 4 or 5. You know, a lot of it was really light stuff all the time, and that's fine. There are plenty of shows that are light, that are good, but it's nice to have layers to dig into, and the grandparents add those layers with all of their expectations and the ways they treat Rory and what they expect out of Rory and what they expect out of Lorelai now as an adult, and the ways that, you know, what they still want for their daughter at this point. And it's like, it's great, you still have expectations even though she ran away and didn't talk to you for so long. So, I mean, the show could have worked maybe as a sitcom without the parents, you know, like, I'm just trying to think of what it would have been like. But they definitely add a richness, they add conflict, and it's just, again, such a well-written show that it all feels quite possible. You know, like, this is somebody's family, I'm sure this has happened somewhere.
Right.
It doesn't feel like pure fantasy.
And it helps to round out that Lorelai's point of view is not the only one. And I think that makes the show better, because you're not just kind of accepting Lorelai at her word. You're seeing her interact with her parents, and sometimes you're like, that's really shitty, Lorelai. Like, you're not being. And then Emily does something like, that's really shitty, Emily. Like, both of them are doing stuff that are cause for concern, but it's not just one person. After they have that meeting in the grandparents' house, and Lorelai asks them to pay for Chilton, and they say, we'll come to Friday night dinner. After that, it's no longer one perspective. It's no longer Lorelai's view of, I did the right thing. It's Emily and Richard's view of, our child was taken from us, and our grandchild, which is even more hurtful. So over the course of seasons, they get to, you know, relive and rehash and grow closer and apart and all other stuff.
So what are some of your favorite quirks about Lorelai and Rory?
Quirks?
Yeah. Or personality traits. Like, for me, one of the things I loved about Rory was what a big reader she was, because I read books all the time, and I loved books, and not that I was ostracized, you know, Rory wasn't either, but it was just nice to see someone on TV who was really into books and knowledgeable about pop culture. I think them as a pair, all their pop culture references are what I love, but as individuals, I'm not how they feed off of each other, but as individuals, like, I really loved how bookish Rory was, and I loved that about her.
Yeah, I agree. That she was always reading, and they were always mentioning book titles and talking. I mean, that stuff I always appreciated. The layers of pop culture about
so
movies
deep.
and film.
Every time I see a Paul Anka album in a record store, I think about Gilmore Girls, and I'm like, should I buy this? And I'm like, but I don't even think I like Paul Anka. But just because they mention him so much, I feel like I need to have Paul Anka in my collection.
I love that Lorelai is very much a go-getter, and she built her life and her business and herself and her
She
home.
really did it, all of it from nothing.
She did.
I mean, she
and I
lived in
think
a
you
potting
have
shed.
to appreciate that. For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, they live in a house that probably cost about $600,000.
Yeah.
I think what Trulia or Zillow did an argument.
Right. And in Los Angeles, how much would that house cost?
So she's always kind of been her own person and tried to figure out what she wanted, and that she held her own with like pretty much every single other male character that she interacted with. She was not given to a submissive position.
Yeah. And what I like about it, in how it's well written, it's exactly what you're saying. She was never written as lower than a man, but it was never written as like, I am woman, hear me roar. You know, like there are some shows that want to beat you over the head with it to make up for all the patriarchy and stuff that we've seen on TV. And so I just like that it is how it is. And it's never like, I'm doing this because and I don't think there's anything wrong with being a feminist. I'm a feminist, but it's never like, I'm doing this for feminism, or, you know, I'm a man, listen to me. It's just everybody was who they were, and there were all these different dynamics at play, but it never really had a lot to do with anyone's gender. I
liked how they just explored female characters that were mean and bitchy, but they had they had underlying depth to them. Paris, you know, Emily, Mrs. Kim. All of these strong women are not just stereotypes or, you know, two-dimensional. They actually had
there were some
life.
Good Mrs. Kim moments when you would kind of see a different side of her, too. And I think that's where the show really shined. Like, it was always kind of good, but it's like, oh, Mrs. Kim, Mrs. Kim, Mrs. Kim. And
one episode where Mrs. Kim finally finds all of Lane's hiding spaces, and Lane comes home, and Mrs. Kim is sitting on the bed, and like the floorboards are open, closets open, and you just see the hurt on her face. It's the same type of hurt that Emily had watching this potting shed. It's like, you hid all the stuff for me. I'm conflicted because you shouldn't be doing this stuff, but you're my child and I love you, and you felt you couldn't.
Yeah, talk to me.
And from that point, their relationship started to evolve, and she started to accept Lane as a musician, and her dating
what's his face,
Dave Rogelski, and then Zach married him for some reason.
Yeah, right. I swear, some of the relationship choices, for me, the relationship choices are like the weakest thing about the show.
One thing I didn't like about Lane, what they did with that story, is that she had sex one time on the beach, and she got pregnant.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Somebody had to, right? Someone had to be the next Lorelai. One thing I always loved about Lorelai was their house. Like, I've always been envious of people who've been able to have that, like, effortlessly have that eclectic look to their house. And
like the monkey lamp?
Yeah, you know, and it just works. Like, you never feel like you're in a junkyard. It's like, if you stop and you think about it, you're like, they had a lot of crap in their house. But when you're watching the show happen, it just feels comfortable, and it feels like everything has some kind of meaning.
Yeah.
And if it didn't have a meaning, they could tell you a story about a moment at the flea market when they just knew that they had to have it. And I always loved that. And I have a couple of friends who can do that sort of thing with their, you know, with their homes or apartments. And I'm always envious of that skill. So that was always one of my favorite things about Lorelai, just the way she curated her home.
Yeah, it's always fun. Yeah, when I used to work on the WB lot, my first job here was a tour guide. I took a tour before I moved here, and I knew that Gilmore had filmed there. They had already stopped filming, I think, a year or two before. And I asked the guide to show me everything Gilmore, and of course I knew everything more than he did. And so they're like, why don't you apply for a job? So I did, and I got a job. So it was always fun to walk around Stars Hollow or the Midwest backlot. And, you know, it was Pretty Little Liars, or it was, you know, part of Dixie for a while, but it was always kind of Stars Hollow. And pulling up to Lorelai's house, which is a practical set, but was actually two-sided. So the other side is Suki's house, which was always fun to walk the guests through Lorelai's and then out into Suki. I mean, the interiors were filmed on the soundstage, but it was still kind of neat. And like Mrs. Kim's house is next door to Lorelai's, but I think in the show it's not.
No, it's definitely not.
But they're like right next. They share a garage.
Because Mrs. Kim's on the show, aren't they like right in the center of town because of the store? Yeah.
So because Mrs. Kim's and then Suki. I don't know if they were ever explicitly next door neighbors, but the house is right next door, and then the other side of the house is Lorelai. Yeah. And then they had Babette's house, which they built the door. They built 2 doors, the little barn door that come out, and one had the door that opened for Sally Struthers. She's only 4'11". Yeah. The other door was the 6-feet door for Maury. So that was kind of fun. Just to see all
taking a tour.
And Babette's house was the Twickham Mansion.
Twickham.
So that's the mansion that Luke wanted to buy Lorelai.
Okay, I was like, Twickham, what show is that from?
Yeah, but the guy that like never died and then finally died.
Okay. Oh man, I wish I had seen a tour or gone on the tour before things changed.
Yeah, one time I saw Jared Padalecki, I think because they did sound for Supernatural, and I was driving my tour bus full of Korean girls who I don't think spoke any English, so it was already an awkward tour. And this black SUV pulls up and rolls down the window. It's Jared Padalecki and us. And he's like, "Hey, why don't you go visit Stars Hollow?" And all the Korean girls were with their cameras because they know Jared, so that was fun. And then Melissa McCarthy was there doing Mike and Molly, so I saw her a couple times. And then Aaron Sorkin had an office on the lot, and he used to walk his assistants when the show was filming. He used to walk and watch Gilmore. And it makes sense that he would have been a fan.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
The same type of fast-paced dialogue.
Yeah.
So
that's funny.
Yeah.
So, who was your favorite townsperson?
Aside from Luke.
Yeah, I feel like Luke's too close to a main character. I gotta say, all the townspeople drove me nuts.
Taylor, I like. Babette, I think, is really funny. Kirk annoys me most of the time.
Yeah.
I think they use Kirk too much. And they've been using him a lot in the promos for the current season, or the upcoming season, which concerns me a little, but we'll see how much he's in it. Yeah, I think they love him, a little too much.
Yeah.
But Taylor and Babette, I think, are my favorite townspeople. Mrs. Kim. But Taylor's just so, authoritarian. And then there's that episode where he loses the election to Jackson.
Yeah.
And then you see him in his soda shop, putting whipped cream in his mouth, so sad. And then it only lasted an episode because he was back. But, Melissa McCarthy was dressed in her Hillary Clinton pantsuit as the wife of the candidate. But the little things like that where they humanize these people that you just see kind of at the town meetings or the grocery store. Oh, he's actually a person who's annoying, but obviously cares.
Yes.
Because he's trying his sorrow.
He's trying really hard. So, before we wrap, what would you say is one thing you'd love to see happen in the revival?
Lorelai and Luke getting married. Because I don't think they're married when we start. That's my impression. I think that sheet was pulled out from under us at the end of most of season 6.
Yeah.
So that's my main thing. Married and happy, and Rory can choose whoever she wants in all 4.
Okay.
So.
All right. I won't think about that. And I would also like to see Lorelai and Luke married. They just belong together. We've known that since season 1. Yeah, I think I'd like to see that. I'd like to not see a lot of Kirk. And I'm hoping that Amy and Daniel didn't get rusty. And that the writing is just as sharp. It was never a show that made me roll my eyes at what was written. And I'm kind of hoping for the same thing. I'm just hoping that it's really well written and, this fits, this fits well with what's gone on.
What are some of your favorite moments from, the series or episodes?
Well, the blow-up and pool house, I mentioned. Yeah. I feel like I don't remember when they happened, but there have just been some really good moments between Lorelai and Emily. And I guess that ties into something else I'd like to see. Some good bonding family moments over the loss of Richard. Ed Herman, who passed away for the revival. Such a bummer.
Yeah.
It's sad that he's like the one person who, definitely cannot be in it. I'm interested to see the women coming together around that and some of the moments around that. But yeah, I think whenever we would get like a solid Lorelai and Emily moment, I always loved that. But it's a show for me that's really weird because I think that after that initial weekly watch of the show, I've just binged it so much that everything blends together. Like, it just feels like their life. So it's hard for me to say, like, this season, that season, and like you're saying, like, well, it's hard to pick a favorite season, but it'd probably be like 4 or 5. It's different than the X-Files, which is very, like, the seasons are much more clear on the X-Files. Like, whether it's the tone or what was going on in the story. And I mean, this is not a fault of Gilmore Girls. If anything, it's a benefit. Like, it all just flows. It just flows the way life does. I think some of my favorite moments were when Mrs. Kim finds all of Lane's hiding spots, because it's another one of those mother-daughter things. And I never hid stuff from my mother, like, physically, but it's something I could totally see myself doing. Like, if I had some hobby that she didn't approve of or some interest or something like that, like, I could totally see myself doing that, and I could totally see her, like, finding the hiding place and totally calling me out on it. I don't remember what season it happens. Maybe you remember. But I feel like there was a really interesting scene between Lorelai and Mrs. Kim. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to remember what it was about. I don't know if one of the girls was hiding at the other one's house, but they had this moment, and these are, again, 2 different mothers. And I would say Mrs. Kim is much more like Emily than she is like Lorelai. And so for Lorelai to come face to face with another mother who's like her mother, I just thought that was an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I can think of 2 or 3 episodes or scenes that I think are probably some of my favorite that encapsulate the series. One is when they do the dance marathon. I believe is they shoot Gilmore's, don't they? And it perfectly sets up the town and Kirk as the reigning champion and Taylor with his megaphone and Lorelai and Rory are competing together, but she's having these issues with Dean and with Jess, and will she choose? And Dean breaks up with her, and then she decides to be with Jess. Like it's not a bottle episode because I feel like every episode is sort of like that.
Yeah.
It's very contained in a specific town event.
Yeah, and Stars Hollow is big on town events.
And the other one I love is Emily Says Hello in season 5, where she and Richard are on a break, and she decides that she wants to go on a date with this guy.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And they go on this date, and she gets home, the guy drops her off, and she's at the door, and the guy says they had a nice time, and she puts her hand on the door, and she goes inside, and she just sobs. And it's like, it's so good, because you understand that she loves her husband, and she's a woman of, older age, and she's, like, going out into the world again, and she's just vulnerable. She's so vulnerable. I really love that. And I think my favorite episode is... It's called Jews and Chinese Food. And again, it's another town event. It's Luke and Lorelai have broken up. But Lorelai had volunteered Luke to help out with the set design for Fiddler on the Roof. And Kirk plays Tevye, and a 9-year-old girl plays his wife. And it's such a weird juxtaposition, but it
would happen in Stars Hollow.
It's Kirk and this girl singing Do You Love Me from Fiddler, and it's Luke and Lorelai watching from backstage, taking in all of those words because they had just broken up all this stupid thing with the boat and the father and the dark day.
Yeah.
It was just so well done, and it was this weird, quirky moment with real, actual human emotion for what these people were going through, and that's what I hope for in the revival, is that level of marriage between the silliness of the town and the depth of the emotion of the revival. Because I think if one overpowers the other, it gets really silly and cartoony.
And, we're getting less time than we did, and I know I'm comparing this to the X-Files a lot, but it's because it was the last revival that we had of like a well-loved show, and it's one that we both love. But, you know, X-Files gave us 8 or 10? 8.
6 episodes.
6, okay. And Gilmore Girls is about the same, because it's 4 episodes, but they're 90 minutes. So we're getting about 6 hours. So they talk fast on the Gilmore Girls, so they can jam in a lot more than we get on, like, a normal show. But I'm really curious to see what they do in the 4 episodes, 6 hours. And I'm really grateful that it's on Netflix, because it means there won't be commercials.
I wish X-Files had been on Netflix, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because
Fox is not going to let it go, though.
I know Fox isn't going to let it go. And that's the reason, but I feel like the show could have probably breathed more if it wasn't confined to network and commercials.
Oh, yeah.
And trying to, like, make it appeal to Joe Schmo in Kansas who's never seen it before. Yeah. It's like, with those stupid 2-minute...
Let's know.
That's not going to happen on Gilmore Girls. They're going to drop you right in, and you either...
And they're just going to start talking.
Exactly. And that's what I love about it, because you can either get, I don't understand what's happening, or you can get up to their speed and go along for the ride, and hopefully Luke and Lorelai get married, Rory is doing whatever Rory's doing, writes a book, or works at a paper, Paris is running around being Paris.
Which is going to be so weird to see her as Paris again after, like, when I first started watching How to Get Away with Murder, I could only think of her as Paris. And now after 2 or 3, whatever, this is the 3rd season, I think, of How to Get Away with Murder, now I'm so used to seeing her as Bonnie that it's going to be weird to see her as Paris again.
Yeah.
But
especially because they kept the same hairstyle.
Oh, you'd be like, where's Frank?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I am very much looking forward to seeing most of the characters again, because they'll almost all be back, including April, but looking forward to it. And as I mentioned, we will be back chatting about what actually happens and unpacking that. I mean, we can speculate all we want, but I can't wait to actually see what happens.
Do you want to make a prediction?
No.
Something you want to...
You can make a prediction if you want. I'm going to go in with, like,
if she has to pick a boy by the end of the revival, who do you think it will be?
If she has to pick someone by the end, I feel like she's going to pick Jess, but the fact that you said what's-his-face is in it all 4 episodes, I don't know.
I'm inclined to say Logan, but she already turned him down once.
Yeah.
So Jess is still in the running.
Maybe I would like to see her not choose any of them.
That's what I was fine with that.
Yeah, I'm cool. I don't think any of them are great choices.
Maybe Logan and Jess can choose each other, and then I'll be happy with that, too.
I would like to see her choose no one and continue to, like, do her thing. And if she finds someone new, great, like some fresh blood kind of guy.
What about Emily and Jess? Because now she...
Anyway.
Emily and Kirk.
Oh, my God.
Because Kirk likes the old ladies. Remember? He had that...
No.
He used to befriend them and sell their
Emily
jewelry.
is in mourning. Emily is in mourning. So we will be back to see if any predictions or anything we wanted came to fruition in the revival. But let me and Justin know what you think, what you're anticipating about the revival. And when you watch it, would love to hear your thoughts. Did it live up to your expectations? Did you want more? Do you hope it comes back? We'll see. So, Justin, let everybody know where they can find you online.
I am on Twitter. My handle is Justin Scarelli. Scarelli. And my Instagram is jscar82.
Yes, and you can catch me on social media. Alaia Williams is my personal account, but you can connect with 18 to 49 at 18 to 49 podcast on Twitter, 18 to 49 on Facebook. You can drop me a note if you have anything to say about the Gilmore Girls at 18 to 49 podcast at gmail.com, or visit the website for previous episodes and show notes at 18 to 49podcast.com. We'll catch you next time, and hopefully we'll be very excited about what we see on the Gilmore Girls.
Boy with the poodles already.
Until next time.
Bye.